Hi everyone, it's Kylie here, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about Fulbright and the application process and stuff like that. So if you're interested in applying to Fulbright, the process can be kind of intimidating. And so this video will hopefully kind of break down that process step by step. It's a really long process, so I'll go through each of the different steps you have to go through throughout this time, and also the materials you're going to need to have in order to submit your application. So let's get started. I made this spreadsheet with all information that we're going to go through today. So first is this timeline. So let's talk about the timeline first. So this is a really long, probably about a year-long process in order to apply to Fulbright. So as a disclaimer, we're going to be talking about the academic Fulbright Research Fellowship. So there are multiple different types. And if you go, this is the Fulbright website, so the US Fulbrightonline.org website. And so there are different types of awards. So if you go to award type, there are different types of awards here. So the first is like the study research award. So if you're like me, you want to do research in another country, then you can choose this one, and it'll pay you to basically do research in another country. And then there are also different types of awards, such as the English Teaching Award, and I think there are also awards for grad students and for professors. So if you're like me, you're an undergrad who wants to do research in another country, this is going to be most relevant to you. I'm assuming for the other ones, it'll be somewhat similar, but that's basically what I'm going to be talking about. I'll be doing this one, the research awards here. Okay, so this is the timeline for that specific Fulbright program. In the junior year of your undergrad program, you're going to decide if you want to apply to Fulbright. If you don't want to apply, then this video is not for you. But if you want to apply, then you will decide now in the winter/fall of your senior year. So, or not senior year, your junior year. Yes. So that's actually about now-ish. So you have a few months from now to decide if you want to apply to Fulbright. Next, so in late winter and early spring, you're going to start to look for a mentor. And this mentor is going to be a professor at a university, I think, in another country. So I originally was thinking, what if I had a kind of a researcher as a mentor who worked at JAXA? So JAXA is not a university in Japan. JAXA is a space agency. And so I thought, would that be okay? And I asked, and it wasn't. So it might be different depending on the country, but I think it has to be like a school, so a university in your country. So I would double check if you're not applying to Japan like I was. So for Japan specifically, I know that it is required for it to be a school, but other countries may differ. So going back to this, so yes, so this is the time period when you will be looking for a mentor, aka a professor at a university in the country of interest. And you can do this through several different ways. So by talking to the other Fulbright people here, Fulbright Fellows here in Japan, there were some people who basically cold emailed. They basically looked for professors in their field of research that they wanted and then cold emailed them and got a few offers back. For me, I personally realized that in Japan specifically, connections and knowing people is really important. So I went through some people I knew who knew other people in Japan, and they were able to introduce me to those individuals. And that really helped me form kind of a strong initial connection to my mentor in Japan. But that's, only if you have the privilege like I did. I was very privileged to know people in Japan. So, or know people who had connections to people in Japan. So yeah, that was better for me. I also know that for some disciplines, Fulbright will actually match you with a mentor. At least that's how it was in Japan. So it'll differ by country. And so the Fulbright website here will have by country somewhere. I don't think it's here. But there will be a page somewhere that will oh, here we go. Review country opportunities. So you can go to this list of countries and it'll show you what kinds of differences there are in the different programs for the country. So for example, if we go to Japan, so East Asia Pacific, and then Japan here. Yep. And then I go to this one. This is graduate student. So this one for graduating seniors. This was mine. So it'll show you, so it'll be a bunch of information about it, you know, the work profile, grant length, grant period, etc. if there's an orientation. But then it'll say down here, affiliation. Yes, if you go to affiliation, it'll tell you if it'll match you with a mentor or not. So for example, it says here, candidates in the hard sciences and creative arts must arrange affiliations with Japanese academic institutions and include invitation letters from those institutions, which we'll get to next, with their Fulbright applications. Candidates in other fields whose research projects require specific placements, i.e. a certain academic advisor or institution, must also provide invitational letters, which I said again, we'll get to next. So and then it says, other than those two instances, preliminary contact with institutions is strongly discouraged. So this is basically saying that if you're in the hard sciences and creative arts, you find your own mentor. Otherwise, they will match you with a mentor for you. So each country will have this section, affiliation, that will explain whether you need to find a mentor or not. So you can look at this one. Okay. Going back here, yes, so if you need to find a mentor, this is the time to do it. And why is it so early? So why do you need to find a mentor so early? Well, first of all, you need to start really early, right? You need to decide really early because you need to find a mentor, and finding a mentor takes a long time. You need to find a mentor because of the affiliation letter thing that was talking about. So basically in the spring and summer, after you find a mentor who's willing to work with you for the application and project, you work with your mentor to first develop a project plan, but also at the same time to ask your mentor for an affiliation letter. Because the affiliation letter, if you go back here, it says invitation letter, but it's also called affiliation letter, is required for the application. And that letter is basically a letter from your professor who you're working with, as well as like I think it's like signed or something by a person at their school to show that it's officially like sent by the school. It has to be on like school letterhead or something, university letterhead. And so that's basically a letter showing that they recognize and approve that you're going to be working, you'll be able to work at that school with that professor if you get accepted. And so, yeah, you need to do that before, you start working on the actual application. Like, you need to have it by the time you submit everything. And so you need to start this very early in order to get all of this done. However, if you don't need to find your mentor, like if you're in, like, for example, for Japan, if you're not one of these people, so if you're not a hard sciences or creative arts related research project person, then you don't need to do that unless you can start later. So for example, you can skip all of these 3 steps and then go to the next one. So the next one is in late summer / early fall. This will often be your school's internal deadline. So for the Fulbright application process, oftentimes, if your school has some relation to the program, they will have an internal deadline set where you provide all of the materials you have so far to the school, and then they will write a personal recommendation form or fill out a personal recommendation form for you for Fulbright. So it's basically a form that the school will fill out with some of your information saying that, oh, we recommend this person for the Fulbright program. I'm not sure how much of an impact this form actually has. I've asked and talked about it with MIT's kind of fellowship office that I worked with for this application, and they didn't know either. So nobody really knows how much of an impact this personal recommendation form from the school has on your application, but I'm sure it is more positive to have it than not, especially if you can guarantee it looks good, actually, like they write good stuff on it. So this is something to watch out for, whether you have a mentor or not. Yep. And so if you meet your school's internal deadline, then they will write this for you. If you don't meet the deadline, you can still apply without the personal, like without the recommendation form from the school. So keep that in mind. You can still apply. So next, the actual Fulbright application deadline is in September, I believe. This is before grad school apps are due, before other fellowships are due. So this is basically the first thing you'll submit in terms of, if you're on the academic track, in terms of like applications for what you want to do after your bachelor's degree in college. So what was especially useful for me is a lot of the stuff that I wrote about for my Fulbright application, I used for my grad school apps, I used for other fellowship apps, and we'll talk about why in terms of the materials later when we get to that. So finally, the last one, you will expect to hear back from the country that you applied to, because you're applying specifically to a country, in the spring/early summer. So, you apply in the fall, you wait over winter, and then here comes spring, and depending on the country, it may be also early summer. Like I didn't hear back until May, and then you will hear back the results, whether you got in or not. Okay, so moving on. So that was the timeline. Basically, it was a long process for me. Would have been way shorter if, I didn't have to find a mentor, but this is the process, basically. All right, so materials you will need for your Fulbright application. Let's go to this. So this website here shows it, so we're going to go to this website. I think it's here. Yep. So for the academic Fulbright Fellowship, which is the research one, research and or study in the country. So first off, you'll need your biological data or biographical data, obviously. It's basically just standard application info. And then the program information. So this gets more into depth about what Fulbright, like what you're going to be doing in Fulbright. So for example, your field of study, your project title. So you'll need a title for the project you're working on. Your abstract summary of the proposal of the project/work you're going to be doing. So these things you're going to probably discuss with your mentor if you have a mentor. Otherwise, you're going to have to think of it yourself, which I think would be much more difficult, actually, thinking back on it. My mentor really helped me with this kind of stuff. Your host country engagement. So what's special about Fulbright is that it not only wants to support people in doing research in another country, but they really focus on fostering kind of connections between countries. So they really want their students to do things in the foreign country that, I guess right here, promotes mutual understanding as individuals, as cultural ambassadors, for individuals to be cultural ambassadors. Yeah, so this is a little bit difficult to understand, but basically you want to write about things that, will encourage sharing of cultures between the countries. So for example, working with the people there to learn English, or for you to learn that other foreign country's language better, that kind of thing. Volunteering is highly emphasized and encouraged. So you volunteering to do certain work in the country, that kind of thing. Stuff like that. So this is where you're going to have to emphasize that. So I think I talked about, so I want to do astrophysics research, right? That's what I'm doing. I talked about volunteering at the local observatory here, which I really like to do. I've done in my past in high school, etc. So I talked about doing that, and I've actually done that. Last weekend, I went to the observatory and volunteered at the star party there, public star party. Yeah, so this kind of thing. Okay, and then plans upon returning to the US. I think most people here talk about going to grad school. I think that's pretty standard. Yeah, so, but that's pretty straightforward, I'd say. All right, so next we're going to the big one. This is the big one here, which is the statement of grand purpose. Basically right here, it outlines the who, what, when, where, and how of what you're proposing for your Fulbright grant. Basically every little detail you can imagine about your research project. This is what you will develop with your mentor if you have one, or if you're not, you can develop it by yourself. if you don't have one. Yeah, so this is a strong, feasible, and compelling project proposal, basically. And I think this is the make or break item of your application, if I'd assume so, since it's like super long explanation here. Yep, so basically some details about this. You want it to be feasible. So you don't want to write about like some super insane, obscure, super long research project that could potentially happen. You want it to be succinct. You want it to be like, you want to be able to describe physical details and physical actions you will take during your project. Has to be intellectually compelling, so something very interesting, an interesting research problem or research idea that you're going to be working towards. As it says here, it varies depending on country. Some countries encourage applicants to incorporate coursework into the project. Yeah, so if you go back to the other page about the country by country specific aspects, it might list here that they would encourage coursework in the project. And I think if you look online, there are like examples of this statement of grant purpose, and some of them include coursework, some don't. Yeah, so as a Fulbright Fellow, I think like depending on the country, you may be labeled as like a student there, and you'll be able to take courses at the university you'll be stationed at in the country, and you may or may not include that in this proposal, this project. Statement of grant purpose is what it's called. I don't think I did for mine. I think I just wrote about research. Yep. Okay, so here we go for applicants proposing independent study and research projects. You will address the following points. So here we go. With whom you are working with, basically your mentor. What do you propose to do? What are you going to do for your research? What is innovative about the research, and what will the research contribute to the field/discipline? What is the new thing you're striving for? What are the specific research goals and methodologies? Like I said before, it's good if your proposal has physical, actionable things you will do while in the country, so that you can emphasize that it's feasible. And also, like, it has to include a timeline too. Like oh yeah, here we go, feasible timeline. We'll get to there. What is important or significant about the project? Pretty straightforward. What contribution will the project make towards the Fulbright goal of promoting cultural exchange and mutual understanding? So this one I think was especially important for Japan, but I'm not sure about other countries. I'm sure it's important for other countries too, but Japan really emphasized this. Like, what about your project will kind of foster the connection between the two countries? So specifically on the Japan website, it said that you need to emphasize this connection between Japan and America. And so for my project, since it's astrophysics, it's a little difficult to describe. And so what I talked about was that astrophysics in Japan is very much centered on kind of Japanese people right now. There's not a lot of international people in Japan working in the astrophysics domain. And yet, research, especially scientific research and astronomy research, especially as well, because astronomy research uses telescopes that are in different countries and such, it's very important for there to be international collaborations with it. And so I emphasize that I will bring kind of an international perspective into the astronomy world in Japan, and also be able to learn the kind of Japanese side of astrophysics research and bring that back to the States. And so that was kind of one of the arguments I had for the connection between, America and Japan for this aspect of the project proposal. I think I also talked about, like, there's a future telescope that's being built, a really big one, that includes a collaboration between Japan and America. And that telescope is due to be built during kind of like my grad school time after this program. And so I also talked about how I'd be able to be like a person with both, like almost an intermediary between Japan and America for that telescope when it's being built, and in my graduate school life kind of career. So it was a good time for me to do this fellowship now. So that was kind of one of my arguments as well. Yep. So you're gonna have to think about, well, If you're a person with a research desire such as mine that doesn't really easily fit into this kind of country and America connection, you're going to have to think about ways to argue for this. Next, when will you carry out the project? Include a feasible timeline. So this is what I mentioned earlier, along with mentioning or emphasizing the actionable things you can do. You also need to write about when you expect to do those things. So like, for example, for my project, I broke it down into certain parts and was like, for this part, I'm going to strive to accomplish it in this amount of time, like 3 months or something. And then the next 3 months, I'm going to try and do this. And then the last 3 months, I'm going to try and do this. So something like that. Where do you propose to conduct your study or research? So basically, maybe, hopefully, the location of your mentor, if you have one, or if you don't, like where you hope to work, that kind of thing. Why do you want to undertake this project? Basically, your personal desires, I'd say. What are your qualifications for carrying out this project? What research experience do you have in the past that's related to this? That kind of thing. What skills do you have? Why does the project have to be conducted in the country of application? This is especially important because you could apply to literally any country. So why specifically do you want to go to this country, and how is that reason connected to your research? Yep. So I personally had the reason of coming to Japan because I'm half Japanese. I wanted to learn more Japanese and connect with my family, but that's not related to research, right? So I had to connect the reason to be in Japan to my research as well as that reason. So I had to have two reasons, basically. How will your project help further your academic or professional development? I think this one's pretty easy to do for most people. If you plan to go to grad school afterwards, you'll be gaining a research experience during these 10 months. So obviously that research experience will be useful in grad school, kind of thing. How will you engage with the host country community? Give specific ideas for civic engagement. So this one goes back to the volunteering emphasis. Like I said earlier, Fulbright really emphasizes volunteering in your host country. So talking about how you will engage with the community, this one is very important as well, and pretty unique to Fulbright, I'd say. All right, so here we go on to the next part. So it says to design a feasible project, you must demonstrate that your research strategy is viable, including its content, methodology, and time frame. So it's going back to the previous points, and here it talks about some specifics in regards to that. So let's go over these. How will the culture and politics of the host country impact the work? And how will the resources of the host country support the project? So this is going into some specifics with the country you'll be in. How you developed a connection with a potential advisor in the host country who has knowledge of the research topic and access to other appropriate contacts in the field. So a lot of these questions, I'd say, like, I don't think I necessarily answered all of them for this one. Just the, like, highly relevant ones. So, like, for example, for this first one, I talked about, like I mentioned earlier, that the astrophysics community in Japan is very highly homogenous, as in most people are Japanese. Most researchers are Japanese. So I talked about how that related to it. Resources, I talked about like some telescopes in Japan, this kind of thing. Okay, next, do you have the requisite academic field specific background to undertake the proposed research? This one was mentioned earlier. So I think like some of these, you could say the same thing, so you don't need to repeat yourself. Always kind of be concise because you only have 2 pages to cover all of this. So if you see like it overlapping, you don't need to repeat yourself. Okay, do you have sufficient language skills for the project being proposed? Yeah, so this one is also important. So as we will see later, there will be a language kind of test requirement. And so you write for yourself if you feel like you have sufficient language skills. And so for Japan, especially since Japanese is the main language spoken in Japan, obviously, and not a lot of people speak English, you need to have good Japanese skills to go to Fulbright Japan, basically. Yep, so you talk about your language skills here. Okay, if not, how will you accomplish these goals? I think some countries are more lenient than others in terms of you know, your language ability. Okay, this is also important here. So you should consider that even if a country indicates that English will be sufficient for carrying out the proposed project, for purposes of community engagement, at least a basic level of language skills should be obtained prior to leaving the United States for the host country. Yeah, so I think I saw in some other, like some examples of statement of grant purposes that some people wrote that they weren't that good at the local language, but during the time period between application and going to the country, they would like focus on studying the language. So that's also like appropriate. So if you don't have a lot of ability in that language, you don't have a high ability, but English is spoken there mostly, but you want to show that you have an interest in the local language, you can put in your application that you will learn the local language as much as you can between the application time and the time you will be leaving for the country. Yep, so that's a possibility as well. All right, what are your plans for improving your language skills if they're not adequate at the time of application? This is basically what they said before. Are there any possible sensitive topics or feasibility concerns that the project could provoke? Yeah, so just talking about this in terms of the culture of the place that you will be going to. All right. So this one, you can choose to go there for a graduate degree program. This was not related, not kind of relevant to me, so I did not kind of cover this, but you can go over this if you're interested in enrolling in a graduate degree there. Here we go. Basically saying that if you are applying through your school to talk about your project with professors there, yep. Some general tips here: be clear and concise, obviously. Basically every application you should be clear and concise. Organize it carefully, yeah, so you want to organize it so that it like flows well and makes sense timeline wise. And don't make the reviewer search for information, of course. Yep. So at MIT, the application, every Fulbright application was kind of matched with a couple professors who had done Fulbright in the past. So when all the applications went through review, each Fulbright applicant would go to a couple professors, 2 professors, to review their statements and stuff like that and provide feedback. So that was included me. I went to 2 professors and they looked over my statement of grant purpose and the such. If your school does that, I think that's a good thing to do. If it doesn't, I would maybe go to seek out some professors who had potentially done Fulbright in the past and ask them to look over your application for you. It's very useful information, I'd say, for them to critique it. So if you can do that, I think that would be a good thing to do. Obviously, if you can't have a faculty member, a fellow student also works, stuff like that. I can also do it for you if you become one of my clients over at my consulting business. I can link how to do that in the description as well. All right, so there's a proper format you need to follow, obviously, for every application there is. So here's the format for this. You need to do this in 2 single-spaced pages. You should not include any bibliographies, publications, citations, etc., except those that will fit in the 2-page limit. So basically saying that your bibliography or whatever will not be kind of an extent of the 2-page limit. So a lot of times for applications, it'll be excluding your bibliography, you need 2 pages. Or you can only use 2 pages or whatever. But this is saying included in the 2 pages is your bibliography and publications and the such. Yep. All right, 1-inch margins and Times New Roman 12-point font, pretty standard. And then it says here, some specifications at the top of the page include your statement of grant purpose, your name, host country, and field of study, and your project title. On the second page, you enter the same information or just last name, grant purpose, page 2. And then you have, do not include information in headers, footers, or margins. So just the normal lines. And then do not include links to websites or external files and materials. Adding any URLs to external websites may affect the eligibility of your application. So just write things. Do not have any links, headers, footers, margins, whatever. Just write. When you open your Word doc or whatever, just write. Don't click on the margin or anything. Just write 2 pages, including this stuff at the top, and that's it. Yep, pretty simple if you think about it that way. All right, so that was this one. Pretty long going over the statement of grant purpose, but it's the most important part of your application. You need to spend the most time working on it and have as many people look at it as you can, kind of thing. Next, affiliation letter. This you will need if you are working with a specific mentor. Yep, so you don't need to read through this too much. Just kind of send this information to your mentor so they can, write this up for you and send it back to you. Yep. Yeah, I don't think we need to read over this. Start early. We talked about that. Why do you have to start so early? Well, it explains this for you here. Yep. So here's the stuff that you will need to send, I think, to your mentor. So the affiliation letter must be printed on an institutional letterhead and must be signed by the author. You can't get just a copy of email correspondence. It needs to be an actual letter, scanned, and then sent, kind of thing. And then, here we go. Do not upload any documents other than a letter of affiliation to this field of the application. So there will be specific fields in the application. Do not upload any other documents other than this to that one, obviously. Yep. Yeah, so here we go. It must be scanned of a hard copy letter with a handwritten signature. Yep. Oh, okay, here's another important piece of information. It must be translated into English, if it's not in English, kind of thing. And then both must be uploaded to the application. Mine was written in English, so I just had to send one, but if you have one that's not in English, you have to translate it and then upload both. Yep, okay. So that was this. The next one is the personal statement. So this is kind of like the other big part of your application other than the statement of grant purpose. So in this one, you talk about yourself and why you personally should go on this project. So it's 1 page, so it's shorter than your statement of grant purpose, and it says it provides a picture of yourself as an individual. So always remember that. You are painting a picture of yourself. You are telling a story of why you should be the one to be selected for this program. Yep. It says here, personal history, family background, influences on your intellectual development, and the opportunities that you have or lack of them to which you have been exposed, and the ways in which these experiences have affected you in your personal growth. So basically your personal growth, your opportunities, your development, your history, family background, influences, that kind of standard stuff. Include your special interests and abilities, your career plans and life goals, etc. Says it should not be a recording of facts already listed on the application or an elaboration of your statement of grant purpose. Thus, make them 2 completely different things. Okay, try your best not to overlap any of the content. This is important. Try to make them about 2 different things. Paint the picture of your research in your statement of grant purpose. Paint the picture of yourself in this personal statement. Yep. So right here. It is more of a biography, but specifically related to you and your aspirations relative to the specific Fulbright program to which you have applied. So always remember, you are painting the picture of yourself, but you are relating it to why you want to do research in the specific country, not just the research overall, in the specific country. Yep. And then there's the proper format here. 1 single-spaced page. Same margins and font as before. On the top of the page, you include personal statement and then your name, host country, and field of study. Obviously, as before, you don't write in the headers, footers, or margins. And obviously, as before, you don't include any links. Okay. Tell a story, yes. All right, foreign language. So if you're going to a country that speaks something other than English, you may need to include this language self-evaluation form as well as, where is it? A foreign language evaluation form. For Japan, this was necessary. I don't know about the other countries. You'll have to check, but these two forms are necessary. May or may not be necessary. This first one is obviously done by yourself. And it's just talking about what you think about your ability in that language. The second one will be filled out by, hopefully, a teacher or professor or whoever who has taught you Japanese. So for me, I asked one of the professors of Japanese classes I've taken at MIT to fill out this form for me. If you don't have a professor you're close with who taught that language to you, or if you didn't teach yourself that, or if you didn't take classes for that language or whatever, you will need to get this form filled out by someone by just sitting and talking to that person. So this form can either be filled out, by that person, like automatically, and they'll send it to you, or they'll, I think, like submit it to the application portal themselves, maybe. Yeah. Or you will sit and you will have an interview with somebody who will interview your ability and fill out this form as they interview you. Then they'll submit it. So one of the two. So if they know you well enough, they can just do it without interviewing you. But if they don't know you at all, they may have to interview you for your ability so they can fill out this form correctly. Yep. Okay, it says here, if it's not required and just recommended, it's still advantageous to have your language ability documented, even though it's not required. So I would keep that in mind. Yep. Okay, so it specifies here, for commonly taught languages, the foreign language evaluation should be completed by a professional language teacher, preferably a university professor. And the language evaluator cannot be related to the applicant, so it can't be a family member, basically. For less commonly taught languages, if a professional language teacher is not readily available, a college-educated native speaker of the language can be used. So, for example, another professor or researcher or whoever who has a college education who is natively trained or has a native level in the language that you are looking for. So, for example, if you're, for Japanese, if your university does not have language classes for Japanese, you can go to a language native Japanese speaker and ask them to fill out this form. Yep. So there's a specific instructions for that. There are specific instructions for that. Yep. Okay. And they will submit the form, I think. You don't have to submit it. Okay, next is recommendations. This one's pretty straightforward. You will need 3 recommendation letters. And there's some suggestions on who they are. Basically, the individuals should be people who can best speak to your ability to carry out the proposed project. So hopefully people who have done research with you, hopefully there are people who have done relevant, like related research to you or to your project that you're hoping to do. So for example, for me, I wanted to work with galaxies. So one of my recommendation letter writers was a professor who I did galaxy research together with, that kind of thing. Obviously they can't be related to you. It suggested you provide the writers with your statement of grant purpose and personal statement. So it's good to note that in this timeline here, you need basically there will basically be 2 more rows here. So let's say in August, finish your statement of grant purpose, and then in September 1st-ish or earlier, request your recommendation letters. Because I think it's middle of September or something, your application is due. So you will need to talk to your recommendation letters several weeks before that letter is due to write those recommendation letters. And it's suggested to remember that you provide them with your statement of grant purpose. So you need to finish your statement of grant purpose several weeks before the application deadline. So this is kind of the actual nitty-gritty of the process here. Okay, let's continue. They will remain confidential, so they will upload the recommendation letters, not you. And there's some specifications here. So it needs to be on an institutional letter or letterhead, then uploaded. Except this time, digital signatures are acceptable. So in the previous one we talked about, which was the affiliation letters, digital signatures were not acceptable. It had to be written signatures. There's instructions for it. You can send them. Has to be in English. They cannot be edited. Oh, but there's some exceptions here. And then, oh, actually the deadline's October 11th for this past one. I think it was September for me, or maybe. Yeah. Okay, so I'll change this to October. Let's go back and change it. Sorry, y'all. This is October. So September. We'll keep this same. So it's late September. And then this needs to be September. Yep. So September you finish. Then you request your recommendation letters, and then it's due in October. Yep. Okay. So remember, this might change for future years, so I would check the application deadline. Yep. All right. So that was this application or recommendation letters. And then of course you need a transcript. Yep, so first you can upload an unofficial academic transcript. There's some requirements here about that. For sure, pretty straightforward. And then this last one is only really required if you're working with human beings or animals. Since I didn't deal with this, but if you are, I would read through this. Okay. All right, so we walked through all of the components of the application. There are so many here, so it's hard to kind of keep track of all of them. I would personally go through the application and do the ones that are easiest. So for example, the biographical data. And then as you learn more and more about the project you're going to be doing, go through each of these and make sure you do all of them and have all of the necessary details. And of course, if you're ever confused or need help and guidance about how to go through this application process and how to do all these things, you can always become my client over at KDA Consulting, and I will give you personalized help on how to do this application and that kind of thing. Yep. So, well, I hope this video was helpful. Let me stop the share. Yep. I hope this video was helpful and that you gained something out of it if you're applying to Fulbright, or, maybe you got scared about the application process. I hope not, and don't want to apply anymore. But either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back later with another video hopefully soon. Yeah. So I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.